everybody in the mainstream media is talking about how the price of gold is set to explode higher.
All roads lead to gold on the back of this.
These are sort of Goldilocks conditions for gold, perfect conditions for gold.
But I think the experts are completely wrong about gold. And I'm going to reveal why in one simple, fast step. Step number one, let's go over gold during recessions. Now, this is a fascinating chart, so you're going to want to take notes on this. The red numbers indicate the days prior to the official start of a recession. The black numbers indicate the days after the official start. On the left, we go from, we'll call it 95 up to 115. This is basically an index that starts at 100. And as you would imagine, this blue line represents the average price of gold. So about 150 days prior to a recession, usually the price of gold starts to trend up until we get to, let's just say, 90, 70 days prior. So that'd be what, maybe 2 or 3 months. And then the price of gold starts to come all the way back down till we get to that recession. And then in the first few weeks of the recession, it starts to flatten out before going absolutely parabolic. And it peaks out usually about 116 days or so after the recession has already started. Now, as you guys know, the official recession date is always announced after the fact, meaning that the central planners are looking in the rearview mirror and they say, yeah, just FYI, there was a recession that started about 3 or 4 months ago. Now, most of us already know that the recession starts because all of our friends are starting to lose their job and it's a lot harder to make ends meet. But if we're trying to predict the price direction of gold, we have to understand where we likely are in the recessionary cycle. And I can absolutely promise you, you're not going to get that information in real time from the central planners. So why is this so important? Well, let's go back to the chart. Let's assume for a moment that this green arrow represents where we are in the recessionary cycle right now. So let's assume for a moment that the recession happens in 2 or 3 months. Well, that means that if history is a teacher, the price of gold is going to go down. But let's assume for a moment that this green arrow represents where we are in the recessionary cycle. That would mean that the recession started in March, the official recession, that we'll find out about in 2024, and that the price of gold is set to explode higher. So obviously there's a huge difference between being right here and being right here. To dive into this even deeper, editor, let's cut right to the internet.
Let's start by looking at a chart of the Fed funds rate and see how that corresponds to recessions historically. Let's go back to the dot-com bust, and we can see the Fed starting to raise rates in, let's call it, May of 1999. They raise rates, then they pause. They pause for a couple months, then they pivot, start to drop rates, and that's when we see the recession. And you can see the exact same thing play out prior to the GFC. The Fed hikes rates, the Fed pivots, the Fed drops rates, then we get the recession. Same thing during COVID. So I would assume that it's going to play out the same way in 2023 or 2024, where the Fed is hiking rates right now. They'll likely pause maybe in the next couple months, and then when they start to drop rates, that's when the stuff usually hits the fan. I want to show you one more chart here before we go back to the whiteboard. This is the inversion of the yield curve with the 2-year and the 10-year. So as you guys know from watching my videos, when the 2-year Treasury yield goes above the 10-year, that is very abnormal. It's not good. And that is an inversion of the curve. But when we get the inversion, this is just predicting that we will likely get a recession. It doesn't give us the timing. In fact, it's very rare to get a recession while the curve is still inverted. Let's check it out by going back to the dot-com bust, and we can see that the curve inverts, let's just call it April of 2000, but then the curve is no longer inverted in December, and then we get the recession. Same thing in the GFC, same thing during the cerveza sickness, and this makes sense. Why? Because the curve steepening or no longer being inverted is usually a result of what we saw in the last chart, which is the Fed dropping rates after the pause.
So the bottom line is I believe that since the Fed is still hiking rates, and we'll see if they pause soon, the recession will officially start in the future. It won't have started in the past. And that's why I think the experts are wrong about gold from the standpoint is I think it will go down in the future. But let me be very clear. Once we get the Fed pivot and they start to lower rates, whether that's in 2023 or 2024, I would take the opposite position. And then I think the gold price will go much, much higher based on what it has done historically. Oh, but wait, there is more. I've got more ammunition to back up my theory. The gold experts are wrong. Let's go back and look at the GFC. Actually, look at the gold price right around Lehman Brothers. When that imploded, we see that the gold price imploded as well. Same thing during March of 2020 when we had the cerveza sickness, when we had the lockdowns announced. Gold took a plunge there as well. Why does it do this? Well, it's actually because it's doing its job. From the standpoint is it is that asset that has no counterparty risk. So it's the asset that people want to buy. And because all of these big pools of money, the sovereign wealth funds, the pension funds, need liquidity, they have to sell anything on the balance sheet that has a bid. Usually, that's gold. And since I believe what we have seen with Silicon Valley Bank, Signature Bank, Credit Suisse, or what we're seeing play out right now in commercial real estate is just the tip of the crisis iceberg, unfortunately, I think the worst is ahead of us. It's definitely not behind us. And that's another reason why I think the price of gold could go a lot lower over the next few months. Now, I know a lot of you right about now are probably scratching your head and saying, okay, George, I get your little charts here and your historical data, but what are you doing with your own personal portfolio? It's a great question. And you may be surprised to know that a large percentage of my portfolio right now is allocated to gold. Now, why on earth would I do that if I think the price of gold is going to go down? Because I don't own gold as a speculation. I don't even own it as an investment. I own it as an insurance policy. And over the past 5,000 years, it's been very good at being insurance. In other words, maintaining its purchasing power. So I'm very content to have it sitting right there in my portfolio over the long run, regardless of what I think the price is going to do in 2023 and 2024.
Are you someone that realizes we are headed straight for an economic recession, maybe even worse? Do you also realize that the government is trying to restrict your freedom, liberty, and privacy on a daily basis? But although you know we're facing all of these problems, you don't know what to do about it. How do you protect your wealth or grow your wealth when we're dealing with a very volatile economic environment? Or how do you maintain or increase your freedom and privacy when we have this woke Orwellian government that's trying to micromanage your life? Well, fortunately, got some good news for you. I have set up an event that is focused on helping you, the rebel capitalist, find solutions to these problems. It's all set up to help you build wealth and thrive in this world of out of control central banks and big governments. That event is Rebel Capitalists Live. It's going to be absolutely incredible. It's in Orlando, May 12th to the 14th. We're going to have speakers like Peter Schiff, Mike Maloney, Lynn Alden, Chris McIntosh, Brent Johnson, Jeff Snyder, Robert Barnes, just to name a few. So to get more information on how you can attend this incredible event that's going to give you actionable intel that will help you prepare for the rest of 2023 and beyond, go to rebelcapitalistlive.com, and I will see you in Orlando.